1830s and 1840s, the Boly Mill was run by the Castérault family. Justin and Claire Castérault used to grind corn into flour for the locals, and they ran quite a successful business. Things were going well for the family until in 1841, Justin Castérault was killed in a carting accident on the outskirts of Lourdes. Claire decided that now was the time to marry off her eldest daughter, because it was clear that they needed a man around the mill to do the heavier tasks. So now was the time for her eldest daughter Bernadette, who was 19 years old, to find a husband. She believed that a local bachelor called François Soubirous, who was himself a miller, would be the perfect match for Bernadette. However, François had already fallen in love with a much younger daughter, Louise, who at 16 years old was about half of his age. Claire took some convincing because of the significant age difference between François and Louise, but François would marry Louise or no one, and so she eventually gave her consent for them to marry. François and Louise got married on the 9th of January in 1843. The young couple lived with the in-laws and they worked in the mill. Claire Castérault and Bernard continued to oversee the running of the mill and kept a very close eye on the income and expenditure. In 1848, Claire, her son and 3 daughters left the mill, and this allowed François and Louise to create a family home at last. Joy filled the Boly Mill on the 7th of January in 1844 with the arrival of the Soubirous' first daughter. The baby was called after her aunt and godmother, Bernard, and we now know her as Bernadette. Bernadette was baptised when she was 2 days old on the 9th of January in 1844 on her parents' first wedding anniversary. Bernadette lived for most of the first 10 years of her life in the Boly Mill. She called it her home of happiness. The love and security she felt here stood to her during the many challenging times, particularly in later life. When she was an infant, however, her mother was burnt by a candle and could no longer nurse Bernadette, and so the baby was fostered out to a wet nurse in Bartres called Marie Aravon Lagousse. Marie Lagousse had just lost a son and was therefore able to be Bernadette's wet nurse during Louise's recovery. The wet nurse was reluctant to allow Bernadette to return to her family once Louise had made a full recovery though. François missed his firstborn daughter very much and found every excuse to visit her as often as he could in Bartres. When Bernadette was almost 2.5, she returned to live with her family in the Boly Mill. She lived there until she was 10, often helping her parents in the mill instead of going to school. The Soubirous were known for their generosity. The needy, and indeed sometimes the greedy, called to the Boly Mill in need of flour or food, sometimes even clothing. François and Louise gave what they had with generosity of spirit, telling the recipients that they could pay them back when they were able to. However, eaten bread is soon forgotten, and the Soubirous' outlay way surpassed their income, leaving them unable to pay their own rent on their home and their business. And so in 1854, the year when Pope Pius IX declared the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, the Soubirous family were evicted from the Boly Mill. Bernadette was just 10 years old. François became a brassier or a day labourer, and Louise did housekeeping and laundry for the better-off families of Lourdes. Sometimes she had to work in the fields, anything to help feed her family and to pay the rent. Bernadette had to work too, looking after her little sister and brothers while her parents worked. She also gathered wood, bones and scrap iron to sell. Going to school was not an option at that time. During this time, the Soubirous moved to a number of other mills, both in Lourdes and on the outskirts of the town. But in September 1857, the family found themselves within days of sleeping on the streets. Their only hope of having a roof over their heads was to move into an old, disused jail cell in the cachot or dungeon, vacated a few years earlier because of its deplorable living conditions.